DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.
Welcome to DAS Talk, the essential podcast on distributed antenna systems and in-building communication, hosted by Peter, VP of Gamma, and Philip Nicholas. This Gamma Electronics series focuses on emergency response and safety. Join us as we navigate the challenges of building effective communication systems for North America's first responders. We delve into the advancements in emergency responder radio systems and the transformative impact on new technologies. Tune in for insightful discussions aimed at increasing knowledge and awareness in the DAS field. Whether you're a professional or an enthusiast, DAS Talk is your gateway to understanding the nexus of technology, safety, and communication.
Hey guys, my name is Peter. I'm with Gamma, and I'm here today doing our DAS Talk. I've got Mike Brownson and Gil Martinez with us today. We're super excited and super happy to have our guests and our co-host with us, Gil. Great to be here with you guys. Love you guys. Thanks for coming out. Looking forward to our discussion today to dive into more about emergency responder communication enhancement systems. And now that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mike. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Mike and what he's done in the industry, where he's been, and why we want to have him on today. Mike Brownson, he's been in the wireless industry for 50 years. His career has been involved in a wide variety of wireless technologies, including two-way radio, cellular, microwave, unlicensed broadband, wireless, and most recently has invested the past 15 years dedicated to distributed antenna systems, including ERCES and other DAS systems. He does training. He does training courses. He sets up best practices for AHJs. And on top of that, Mike also holds numerous certifications in the industry, and he works on committees. He's very involved in Safer Building Coalition as well. Welcome to the program, Mike. Thanks for coming.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter and Gil. Appreciate the opportunity to come. You know, as folks that know me know, I'm pretty passionate about this industry. And so I'm excited about this opportunity to kind of spread the word.
Absolutely. That's what this is all about, a great platform where we can discuss things in sort of a relaxed way, and we can reach as many people as we can. Because like you're saying, there's the good word. Some people look at it as the gospel, right? We have the gospel of ERCES, I guess you could say.
That's right.
And can you tell us just a little bit about some of the recent things you've been doing, maybe some of the experiences you've had, some notable things you've accomplished in your career that kind of help qualify you for this?
No, thanks. Yeah. As you mentioned, right, I've been involved in, ERCs in building wireless coverage and predominantly in the, public safety and building coverage space for 25 years. Well, I would easily say my latest big accomplishment, and I would say that in a way, the highlight of my career is being a writer and publishing or managing editor of the Complete ERCES Handbook that was published by the Safer Buildings Coalition. So this is by far the most complete reference manual on everything ERCES. And this from what the integrator needs to know, but also applies to the AHJ and the license holders. And what do they need to know? And how do these whole things work? It's a 600-page book of everything. And the reviews we've gotten from the industry have been really, truly amazing. Everyone says it's just spot on. So by all means, I mean, that is the book to have in this industry.
So are you talking about this guy right here? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that would be my book.
That would be your book. It's pretty heavy.
One could use it as a weapon if you wanted. So just in case.
Mike, what I think is really cool is, talking to so many integrators, and they're reading the book. They're working their way through the book. So it's kind of neat that, to see that impact that you guys have had on the industry. Just in the book's was available, was it May of last year? I can't remember when it came out, but And I have two copies, but one I read and just one that's there. So
Yeah. Well, I think we shipped the first copies in May of last year, 2023, and we're already prepping for the third print run. We've run out twice, almost three times. So right now, I'm actually working with the Safer Buildings team and coming up with the mostly just edits, typos, little stuff for the third print. So folks that will be getting the third print will find, just let's say fewer typos. When you have 600 pages of content, a few typos are kind of bound to sneak in there.
yeah. So how many copies have you guys, have gone out so far?
Oh, I over a couple thousand. I don't know the exact
Wow.
number. But, on the other hand, when we look at the potential in this space, so I think we've hit the integrators that are really focused in the ERCES space, pretty well. So we call that, the low-hanging fruit. I think, as you said, you've got a book. A lot of folks have a book. We've gotten a lot of great feedback. But there's some 10,000 AHJs, in terms of cities, municipalities that could use this, all the license holders. You look at just the integrator list of fire alarm folks in that industry that are looking into this industry and looking to be self-sufficient. There's just thousands more. So there's a lot more opportunity to get outreach in the book. And the goal behind the book was really to increase competency at the integrator level, competency at the AHJ, and I hate to say competency at the FCC licensee. Let's call that awareness for the FCC licensee as to what their responsibilities are.
So, you know what? You brought up a good point. And what I wanted to caveat on that, could you elaborate a little bit on the difference of the roles between the AHJ authority having jurisdiction and the frequency holder?
Yeah, sure. That's something there's been a lot of confusion over in the past about, there's a lot of fire code officials that think they have the ability to basically allow a BDA to be turned on. So when we look at what the roles are, the FCC license holder, those are the folks that basically own and operate the radio network itself. And they have an exclusive license to use those frequencies in their area of coverage. The AHJ, on the other hand, the fire code official, their responsibility is to assure that the installations comply with the code, and in both in terms of construction and performance of the radio. Now, the FCC license holder, their primary concern is to make sure that installation doesn't cause interference that's disastrous to public safety radio communications and reliability. So, but to reiterate, the FCC license holder by FCC law, by federal law, is the only one that can authorize rebroadcast or retransmittal of their frequencies. So it's important that the integrator know who the FCC license is and gets that permission. It's also important that the HJ understand that they actually don't have permission, the ability to allow that BDA to be turned on.
So Mike, are there times where the FCC license holder and the HJ could be the same person or same entity, or is that typically not the case and they're two separate entities or people or departments or what have you?
Yeah, a great question, Gil. Sure, there are times, for example, maybe the fire department has their own dedicated channels, and they are also the licensee. So that could very well happen. But typically in these trunking systems, in these shared networks, often in the 7,800 megahertz range, P25 systems, these are usually large shared systems. They're going to have fire service, police, garbage trucks, dog catchers, all the city services or county services will be on the same radio network. In those situations, it's very rare for the fire code official to also be the licensee.
Well, I was going to say, obviously having been an integrator for so long too, I mean, what resources are there, I guess, for integrators to find out who the licensee could be? Because maybe they know the AHJ, they've been working with them, but say the licensee is somebody else. How would an integrator go about finding out who that licensee may be?
Well, with your role as an integrator, I'm sure you found at times that you ended up being the educator.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're
100%.
reaching out to the AHJ, and ideally, the fire code official, the AHJ, should know who the licensee is and who to contact and what that administrative process is. But if they don't, then it's really upon the integrator to discover that during the discovery process. That's one of these. It's an important process that should be done and has to be done prior to quoting and building any of these in-buildings amplification systems. Now, there are some resources available. There's an online resource called radioreference.com. You've got to use it with a little bit of caution because, it may have frequencies that they don't need. The frequency list may not be entirely accurate, but it's a good first step reference if the HJ doesn't know that information. And what's handy about radioreference.com is when you dive into these, for example, like trunking systems, there will be a hyperlink in there that actually takes you to the FCC licensee. It takes you to the FCC licensing site. So the actual FCC database. And in that database, there's going to be the primary contact, the tower locations, their area of coverage, their frequency list. That is the best resource for determining who that licensee is and who to reach out to.
Oh, great. That's a great tip. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's some really good information there. And I'm sure that you elaborate and kind of go into that quite in detail during your training sessions that you've been doing. I hear you've been kind of, I think you've been over to Gray Bar and you've done something there. What's going on with your training? Tell us about what you're doing and why guys should come and attend. And who are you training? Are you training integrators? Or are you training who? Yeah,
Peter, thanks. That, as I mentioned early on, this ERCES space is a passion for me. It's necessary to protect the safety of our first responders and the public. And they have such an opportunity to create interference that I've learned a lot in my 50 years in RF. And having written the book, and I'm not going to take sole credit for that. I had a lot of help in writing the book. But my job was, both writing aspects of the book as well as being the managing editor and taking all these disparate pieces and putting together in a way that flowed in a common sense way. So after writing the book, I retired from an OEM. And after working with that OEM to essentially create their current product line, then I retired from full-time employment, and Safer Buildings approached me to manage the bringing this book together. That was about a 1.5 year process. And once that finished, I'm thinking, what does this industry need? I wanted to stay involved. So I started up a training company. It's at ERCEStrainer.com. And so what I'm doing is I've set up so far 3 classes that I've set up myself and put the word out to the industry that, hey, if you want to learn more about how to install ERCs from a system integrator perspective. So to answer your question, these classes are aimed at system integrators with the intent to increase their competency in being able to install these systems properly and correctly and to code and to not interfere with the radio network. So that's the big deal there. So I've also been asked to do some private classes for specific companies. So got a few of those things going as well. So this is a full 2-day class, soup to nuts. It's also intended to be a prep class for the NICET in-building public safety communications certification. So I'm aiming at basically helping folks get their level 1 and level 2 technician certifications.
Oh, cool. So if I was a technician coming to your class and you were to start it up, and in the very beginning, what would you want me to know, like right off the bat? Like, let's just say I'm coming from, fire alarms, and how would you start off? Like, what would you tell me? I'm really curious, actually. Like,
That's a great question, because when presenting these classes, the students that I've had so far have been everything from a fire alarm guy that doesn't even know how to spell RF, to folks that have been installing public safety systems for years and have installed essentially 100 or more systems. In fact, I know I had a class recently where I had a guy who was very experienced. What's great about that is I'm getting feedback from those experienced folks who basically are saying, I'm pretty much a dead nuts on. And every one of them has come out of the class with some nugget of information that they found useful. Now, to your question, if you don't even know how to spell RF, that's okay. I cover that. I have quite a background in RF. Like I said, 50 years of wireless. And I've been able to explain the RF characteristics and power and decibels and RF behaviors, both in building and outdoors. So I cover all of that because having an understanding of RF principles, and especially decibels and link budgets, if you don't know that, quite honestly, if you don't know decibels and link budgets and RF behavior, the integrator shouldn't be installing these systems. I know that's kind of harsh, but it's true. If you don't know it, don't do it. Bring in some help that does know it. But it's all learnable. And that's the cool thing is between my class and between experience and perhaps between working alongside a knowledgeable integrator that's doing that, the smarts part of the installation, it's all very learnable. It's not rocket science, as I say.
So Mike, let me ask you, and this it's kind of a complicated topic, but like you had mentioned, you had retired, and there's so many folks that I'm working with and friends that I have in the industry that are either about to retire or have retired, and they have been, we've been talking about the legacy. What can they do to help the people that are coming behind them? Because I feel like, I've been in the industry a long time too, but now we're seeing, people like yourself. I would consider you guys like the pioneers of RF because our industry is so young compared to other trades. And it's interesting because there's really nowhere to go to learn these skills. I think of other trades and they have different schooling, classes, whatever it may be. But what do you see kind of as the legacy? I mean, do you think something like a NICET is kind of the start of that, or kind of where do you see things going as, people start retiring and moving on in life, for the younger, or I don't know, I guess the next generation or the younger generation, to be able to continue kind of what these pioneers like yourself had started from the beginning years ago. So,
yeah.
I know it's like a mouthful, but it's just something that I know that has come up a lot with discussions I've had, because I feel like we're at this inflection point within our industry. So I just kind of want to get your take on how you see that and the legacy piece, or how do we equip the next generation to do right by you guys, having kind of paved the way in the RF world?
Yeah. No, I think that's another great question. Well, two questions in there. One, you talked about, NICET and its place in the industry. I'm 100% behind what NICET's doing, right? So Safer Buildings Coalition worked with NICET to basically create this certification. And in my opinion, it's the only valid certification, right? Right now, a lot of code requires the GROL, General Radio Operator License, as issued by the FCC. The problem with the GROL is it has nothing to do with BDAs and public safety. But there was nothing else. Well, now there is something else. We have the NICET IBPSC certification, which really gets right to the heart of things and does its best to certify that those folks that have that piece of paper actually know what they're doing. Because NICET looks at both a knowledge test, an exam, which makes sense, but they also collect a resume of projects and recommendations from the supervisors as to, basically vouch for that individual that, yeah, they've done this and they know this stuff. So we're encouraging AHJs to start really think about requiring a NICET certification for these installers. And, I mentioned competency, and what the NICET certification does is it's one step toward ensuring competency, right? It's not a one and done, but it's the best thing that's out there to ensure that that installer has some level of competency, and that basically they've done this work before and they have the knowledge required. Now, you then talked about the legacy. What are these folks that are looking to retire going to do? And, like myself, if I feel it's a pass it on sort of thing, right? And I very firmly believe that, those that have an understanding and are in a position, that have the opportunity to do what I'm doing, they should be involved and start reaching out. I will say, as right now, probably there's very few training opportunities, right, for folks to come and learn about this.
And I think that's been the challenge because, you think, there's trade schools or, college or whatever, but I feel like in our industry, it's almost like an on-the-job training. There's nowhere you can really go. You got to get in with an integrator, or maybe it's an AHJ or a different entity, and just kind of work your way up and get those skills. Kind of to your point with NICET, to be able to get that resume together, to be able to get your NICET cert. So, it's a little different than any other trade. And, like I said, the age of our industry is so short that I think the NICET, that's a great start. It's a great way. To me, it's light years compared to what we had in the past. Getting your G-roll license, where, unless you're a maritime captain, there's really nothing that's applicable to what we do in the RF world.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that G-roll, you go to a 3-day class, you memorize everything, you take the test immediately after, and then you immediately forget everything because it doesn't matter. Well, what use is that? And I would encourage folks that are in my position, I will say that the need for training is greater than my ability to pass on this information. So I'd be more than happy to help anyone that's looking to get into training, that has the time, the characteristics required to be able to pass on knowledge in an understandable way. I'd be happy to help them because I feel it's that important.
Like you're saying, if you get a better trained, integrators and staff and technicians and people who know what they're doing, the end result are systems that protect first responders and the public and keep them safe in buildings and help them communicate. That's really what the end goal is, right? But it's really difficult to get from A to B because there's so much to unpack, and it's such a big. We're not underneath one system. You've got 10,000 AHJs you talked about.
Yeah.
And each guy's reading a book and seeing the code a little bit different, like you talked about. And then you've got integrators, some who are really experienced and some who are not. And there's enough work to go around for everybody. And we've got to be able to get to that point. And it seems like it's a huge undertaking and kind of a big gap in what we need to accomplish from everything I gather what you said.
Yeah, no, there basically is a pretty large gap. There's more demand for these systems, particularly in certain markets, than there are people to competently install these. And so, like I mentioned in my book, I mean, the goal of the book is really to increase competency. The goal of my 2-day training is to increase competency. And when we look at installing ERCs compared to other trades in the building industry, the building industry is broken out into all sorts of different trades. You got one company doing may do drywall, someone else may do paint, someone else does carpet, someone else does doors, someone else does the plumbing. Well, if I don't do a great job painting, let's say, or trimming out, or installing the cabinets, or whatever that may be, who does that affect? That just affects the person living there and having to deal with it. Well, if I do a bad job as an installer installing a BDA system, it has the potential to cause interference to the entire radio network. There are instances of entire radio networks being brought to their knees over square miles of coverage where no police, fire, or emergency personnel can communicate in this area because there's so much interference.
Wow.
So we have this huge difference between competency of a painter is one thing. Well, competency of an ERCES installer is huge. So that ability to create interference and cause interference by poorly installed BDAs. And let me add one note to that. There's an understanding, there's an idea, a myth, whatever we want to call it, that BDAs cause interference to radio networks. That is patently untrue.
Really? Poorly
Installed BDAs cause interference to radio networks. We have to qualify that. A well-installed BDA will work just fine, cause no interference.
Huh.
So
there's you were talking about how RF works differently indoors and outdoors. Yeah. How so?
Well, when you look at how RF travels, all right. So first off, we have to understand, because it's radiating all directions outward, RF reduces by the square of the distance, right? So every time you double the distance, the power, the RF strength reduces by 3/4. So you have a quarter remaining instead of half every time you double that distance. Well, so we're talking about great distances. Obviously there's losses from the radio transmitter site to the rooftop of the building needing coverage. And there may be obstructions in the way as well. There might be trees, hills, buildings, whatever. You may not have a direct line of sight. So all of those things will reduce the signal received at the top of the building. Okay.
Do they need line of sight? In that instance, does the donor antenna to the tower need line of sight?
No. So long as there's adequate signal and adequate signal quality, all right? Because we can't just look at signal strength. We also have to look at signal quality. That would be your bit error rate, or your signal to interference plus noise ratio, your SINAR. Mm-hmm. I've heard at times where, you had a good signal, but the SINAR was poor. They moved to another corner of the building that improved the SINAR, problem solved. That's kind of, when we talk about competency and experience at the integrator, if you're just looking at a spectrum analyzer and signal strength and the fire official that's doing the testing still can't talk, well, you got to figure out why as an integrator. RF is not easy stuff because it's not all about signal level. It's about signal quality. And the change in the code to measuring delivered audio quality, DAQ, really speaks to that. It's not about signal level, it's signal quality. Now, to answer your original question about the indoor-outdoor, well, indoor, of course, you have a lot more obstructions. A standard drywall, you lose about half of your RF signal at 800 megahertz. A poured-in-place concrete wall to a stairwell, which are required, those mandated coverage areas at essentially 100% coverage in stairwells. Well, if there's a heavy-duty cement wall, you could be losing 99.99% of the signal that hits the outside of that cement wall will penetrate into the stairwell. So by understanding the material characteristics and how RF propagates in a building is important to both a designer who's creating the system and deciding where to place antennas. It's important to the technician that's troubleshooting these systems. If I have poor coverage in a stairwell, well, how do I fix that? Right? They need to understand some of those RF basics and that propagation of RF indoor to be able to solve problems that may crop up.
So the answer isn't just to, let's just say, turn up your BDA.
No.
Right?
No. More.
Don't do that, right? So if it's not working, I can't just crank it up like a radio. You know what I'm saying? And just be like, whoa, and get it a little bit louder. As you say, that's not what I need to do. No.
Turn it
More
to
is not
11.
better.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
So in my training, I always talk about you want to use the least amount of power possible on both
Oh,
the downlink and the uplink to do the job. No more than you have to. On the uplink, if I crank up that uplink gain, well, what am I doing? I'm spewing noise out into the environment that would potentially, probably cause noise rise at the radio site. If I crank up my downlink, I may have RF leaking outside the envelope of the building and potentially causing interference to first responders that are standing around and outside the building, or it could leak over to that adjacent building, and now you have two BDAs, two buildings interacting poorly and creating interference. So no, crank it up is not the solution.
got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now this is, Gil, you've been an integrator. Mike, you seem like you're on the other side on, a little bit about code. Is there code confusion, right? So there might be some disconnects there, some code confusion going on between AHJs and integrators and sort of expectations. I've heard about that thrown around. You brought it up in a conversation we had before. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think code confusion is a good way to phrase it. The codes and standards. So you get IFC 510 as a code, NFPA 1221, 1225, and those are standards. All right. So I know they may be splitting hairs, but either way, they become code when they're adopted. So the code itself, it's black and white, right? It should be perfectly clear. It's in the book, follow code. Well, so where the code confusion comes in is how sometimes does the HJ interpret what's in black and white in that code book, right? There are times where there's some confusion, but probably a bigger thing that I run into is not so much the HJ not necessarily grasping what's in black and white in the code book, but what they require locally that's not necessarily in the code book. We can take a good example of that would be in Southern Florida. Most HJs in Southern Florida require that all the coax cable to the distribution system and to the donor antenna be encased in conduit. Well, nowhere in the code after 2016 version is that a requirement, except where that cable can be exposed to physical damage, like maybe in the ceiling of a parking garage, right? Or if its cable is laid on an exposed rooftop, where it could get stepped on, run over by a hand truck. Well, that needs to be in conduit, and that is in the code. But everywhere else that it's up above a ceiling, code has no requirement for conduit. Yet most HJs in Southern Florida will require it anyways, whether it's written in their local amendments or not. So there's certain gotchas that the integrator really needs to understand when they go into a new market area that they haven't done work before. There's a process I call the discovery process, where you reach out to the HJ, you reach out to the actual code official that's going to be doing the inspection in that building. You reach out and figure out who the FCC license holder is and what is their process to get the rebroadcast agreements. And then there's certain gotchas, questions that you want to know, such as how are they interpreting pathway survivability, both from a physical and a fire protection standard, right? Because fire alarm cable has a certain standard where there's, for the most part, it's supposed to be like 2-hour protected. Well, ERCES is a bit different. And it's a little more complicated than I can cover probably in this conversation, because you've got segments from the International Building Code that identify the survivability, the fire survivability rating of the building structure. And then you've got parts in the NFPA code, which addresses fire survivability, that references that the cabling system shall meet the building's fire rating. Well, so where do I find that building's fire rating? Well, that's in the IBC, the International Building Code. I believe it's table 601. will identify what that survival rating of the building is. So then you got to go back to your plan summary, the code summary for that particular building, and see, well, what is its fire rating to make sure that, do I need a 2-hour path unless it's a high rise? Probably not. But maybe I only need a 1-hour path. Maybe I need a 0-hour path. So how do I find that? Well, obviously I cover that in my training, and it's spoken in depth. It's covered in depth, in the ERCES Handbook. And I would say Safer Buildings Coalition did a great service to the industry. They made that section of the book free to the public. So I can't remember exactly where to get it. I'm sure if you go to saferbuildingscoalition.com or ERCEShandbook.com, somewhere in there's going to be a way to download that section of the book, because that's one of the biggest issues that integrators run into is pathway protection.
Why do you think, like you brought up Southern Florida, why do you think they would be more onerous than the code? So you're saying it's a mechanical protection, because I've actually had this very specific discussion with other integrators, and they will say, well, no one's ever going to be able to touch that cable. It's in a riser. It's not in a riser, but it's up on the top of a ceiling. No one's going to be able to get to it. It can't be hit by anything. Why am I putting this in conduit? It is a big beef. It is a big issue, right? So, and I'm like, well, yeah. I don't know. I don't make the code, and I'm not asking for it. Why are they being more onerous in that, like, for example, in that instance in Southern Florida? I don't know. I don't know the Florida market so well, but why do you think that would be the case?
Because they can. Okay, so prior to 2016, the NFPA code did talk about levels 1, 2, 3 protection, which included the ability or the opportunity to put it into, EMT conduit or some other protected place. So some of this, I think, is just a carryover from the past that they've continued to hold on to, again, whether it's written or not, because what they require, ideally, it's going to be written in a local amendment. And I'm sure some cities in Southern Florida have done this. They have an administrative process and the local amendments that they put out in a handbook or in some sort of a release that's available to the integrators. But not all AHJs have done that. And sometimes they'll just say, hey, because I said so. So I think that speaks to one of the challenges that integrators have in this industry. When they're familiar with the jurisdiction, they got the because I said so's. When you're not familiar with it, that's where we go back to the discovery process and the understanding that I need to ask some very specific questions, some of these gotchas, so that I don't run into problem after the install is done and I find it's not compliant to code and I got to pull it out and do it again.
So you had mentioned NFPA 1221, and now obviously, we have 1225. Do you see 1225 helping to, we're talking about code confusion. I mean, do you think something like 1225 will help to, I guess it'll never eliminate it, but to help to kind of reduce it or mitigate it a bit so it'll be easier for folks?
Yes, all caps with an exclamation point at the end. 1225 is great. I mean, is it perfect? No. There's some continued things, some tweaks that we're looking at down the road. But I was being involved with Safer Buildings Coalition on the Codes and Standards group and having input into the revisions that went into 1225. In fact, I'll pat myself on the back. Actually, one of my recommendations went into 1225 with the help of Safer Buildings Coalition's team looking at my proposal and go, hey, that's actually a really good idea. So what I like about that is two things. One, as a member, as any citizen, we can have the impact on what goes into the code revisions. And with Safer Buildings Coalition, Codes and Standards Group, having been deeply involved in the 1225, I would say in that group, there's at least 4 or 5 individuals that are actually on the NFPA committee that votes on what gets passed and what doesn't, or what gets accepted. So as an organization, Safer Buildings Coalition has a lot of oomph, in code development. And here we have the industry experts. We have this collection of industry experts that are part of the coalition, putting their best practices and knowledge into the next version. So yes, capital yes, 1225 is a big improvement over the previous versions. And I would highly encourage any AHJ that tunes into this to consider adopting 1225 as their standard.
Yeah, and Mike, you and I both live in Colorado, and I know in Colorado Springs, it helped some integrators, and they've adopted, or I don't have fully adopted 1225, but it's kind of neat to see our town, my town here in the Springs, adopting it. And so so I agree with you. AHJ should really consider adopting it. Absolutely.
I think what 1225 did predominantly is it cleared up the confusion. So you talked about code confusion, right? And some of the earlier versions were a little more vague about exactly how to interpret things. And 1225 removed some of that vagueness. So it really did a lot to clarify things. And to in some ways uncomplicate so that things are clearer.
Maybe with backbone and distribution and riser cables and stuff like that, kind of clarifying those kind of things. And I think I was reviewing some of that kind of stuff there.
Yeah, agreed.
So
I would say there's a lot of areas where 1225 clarified a number of things, but as I mentioned that pathway protection, both mechanical and fire, that's been probably one of the bigger issues that we've seen in the industry, and 1225 is going to help that out a lot, clarify things. For example, it very clearly states that the distribution antenna system requires 0 fire survivability. That fire survivability is only to the backbone. Now, I could add that the definition of backbone still has a little bit of fuzziness because, designs can be very complicated in buildings, and you can actually have multiple backbones branching out in different directions, for example, that are critical to the survival and the operation of the system. So it's like I said, 1225 is not perfect, but it's way better than what we had.
Very nice. So let's talk just real quick about how people can. We'll kind of start wrapping up this session here. How can people get a hold of you, Mike, if they want to get a hold of you on social media, or what's the best way to reach out to you if they wanted to do a training course with you? If they're like, they got this guy who just knows all this about RF. He's amazing. He's a great trainer. Everyone loves him. How do they get a hold of you, man?
Oh man, you're going to make me blush, Peter. So I mentioned earlier, my website is ERCEStrainer.com. That's ERCES trainer.com. So obviously they can reach out to me through my website. My email address is mike@ERCEStrainer.com. Pretty simple, I like simple. Life is too complicated already, so I try to keep things simple. And obviously they can look me up by my name, Mike Brownson, on LinkedIn. Reach out to me that way. I've got obviously lots of connections. I use LinkedIn predominantly because it's a great, business to business, professional to professional social media platform. So when I am doing any public trainings, I will post them out on LinkedIn. So one can always follow me on LinkedIn to make sure that what trainings are being offered. And I think that's, I'm not going to say, obviously, my phone number, it's on my website, it's in LinkedIn. I welcome calls, and I even welcome if someone just wants to pick my brain about something. I'm not all about the money, right? I'm about let's make this industry work better. So I'm more than happy to provide, some expertise, just a brain picking, shall we say, if anyone wants to give me a call.
You and I had worked at an OEM together shortly, and
Yeah.
kind of more of the blushing thing, but no, I just appreciated all the time you had spent with me. And again, just kind of those brain picking, because even after you had retired, I was still calling you, and you were still taking my calls, and you were still answering questions. So I just appreciate that. And I know, just sharing that information that you have. I mean, 50 years of experience. I mean, there are a lot of those intangibles that people just don't know, not being in this industry. And I think it's just great that you're helping to, impart that to the next, I don't know, generation of RF, or however you may word it. But no, I appreciate you, and just, thank you for everything, you'd helped me with, for a long time. So thanks so
Well,
much.
thank you, Gil. And I guess as a parting comment, if the viewers of this podcast haven't purchased an ERCES handbook, do so. Go to urseshandbook.com. I don't get royalties. Okay. This is, I don't make any money off of sales of the book. But it's just such a great reference manual for everybody involved in the industry, even building owners, if they want to, building owners and managers that really want to understand, like, what are these systems and why? We've tried to address everybody. But as I said, my personal goal with it was to increase competency at the system integrator level. So a lot of it is aimed at them, but we broadened the audience so that it's a useful handbook for pretty much everybody that might be involved in this space. Architects, engineers, building owners, managers, and obviously the system integrators. All right.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Gil. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you being with us today. And we'll look forward. Thanks for joining us on today's DAS Talk. It was a great episode. I hope we all got uplifted and learned a little bit more about each other and about our passion. Thanks, guys.
DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.